GIRO'S physically looked, I'd have to say, fairly unprepossessing.
It was a derelict building when we moved in, and we did a bit of work to it here and there, but I guess probably now walking into it, it would probably still seem a bit like a derelict building.
Initially it was a dive, you know, it was a real run-down building with a lot of problems. But when you're high-spirited and forward-looking and stuff, you don't see these things.
It was tucked up this grotty little alleyway, hidden.
It was quite a small building, and downstairs was a practice room. There was a kind of a grotty set of stairs. It was quite dark.
You're going to come in through the front door and there's going to be about 6 dogs tied up. There's a band on your right blasting out tunes out of a practice room. If you go there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, between 12 and 1 in the afternoon, there's going to be a queue of people up the stairs. Punks, mothers holding babies, guys and women in part dress and suits.
Architecturally, I don't think it was anything too spectacular, but it kind of summed up all of us up. I think it was very fitting for ourselves. I just thought it was brilliant. I thought it looked fantastic.
There was nothing else like it in town, and it was a very cool place to hang out at lunchtime.
I can practically remember, and this is more than 20 years ago, walking in literally in school uniforms, and the moment I opened the door, it was like, this could either be a horrendous mistake or it could be the start of something really interesting.
In 1978, I had just left school, straight onto the dole. My last years in school, I just really discovered punk, bands like the Pistols and the Clash, and still living in the New Lodge area, sort of inner city North Belfast, with not a lot of opportunities, or especially being on the dole, and also not a lot of opportunities for creativity.
I was from Whitewell in North Belfast, which now has a lovely big peace wall through it, and I was in the middle between two kind of rival estates. So one week I could get beaten up by one estate, and the next week I could be beaten up by another estate, and that was my lot as a young person. So I became very kind of shy and introverted.
I always felt I didn't fit in at school. I went to quite an upper-class girls' grammar school, and I never felt particularly comfortable there. Tried to do the social scene that most of the girls in the class followed, but nothing really ever just clicked properly with me.
When we were 13, my sister and I were both beaten up because we had gone out of our area, and my mum was extremely overprotective and wouldn't actually let us out. Was quite happy not to let us out, not to encourage us to be confident. She was quite happy to keep us in.
You were expected to just do what everyone else did, basically, and to sort of toe the line, and did not really be that different.
I just remember a real lack of opportunity. I remember Belfast as being very, very dead. I remember bombs, bullets, sectarianism and stuff like that, and very little vision of a future.
It was a fairly grim time, all in all. You know, it was time around about the hunger strikers, and you know, the city was dead at night. It was all locked up. There was nothing really going.
Mrs. T was in power, and I think unemployment was 3.5 million or something like that, and those who weren't unemployed were on youth schemes, which basically meant they were all still unemployed, but it was good for kicking the books.
My school, a girls' state grammar, part of the education system was, the careers talk was, just get out of here. There is nothing for you here.
Just Books, libertarian, anarchist bookshop and more.
I used to come up to Belfast all the time. I would come up for gigs, but I would come up during the day to go to the likes of Just Books and Just Books was an amazing place. I love Just Books. I always used to come up there. Every available opportunity, anytime I was up in Belfast, I would have come along to Just Books, eat in the cafe, read the books, or more likely the magazines, and just hang out.
I get attracted to Just Books because I used to go around, walking around town, and came across it once, and there was punk badges in the window. Thought, well, that was it, go and get a badge, and then you saw the books.
We would have met Pete and pals of his, and we would have started to go to Just Books. So that would have been our first initiation into actually an actual establishment where all this kind of look and opinion was accepted.
From that, of course, it was the Anarchy Centre, and I went along to the Anarchy Centre, and it was equally amazing. For me, it was just a total, just amazing place.
We all like that Santa. Plenty good. Don't want to go on a Saturday instead of sitting in the cold in the
You're using anarchy. How about that?
Don't believe it.
You don't? You hear this? You hear this? Don't believe in anarchy. Get out. My first experience walking into the Anarchy Centre, where the people had a bit of time for you. You weren't met with growlers. Most of the bars in town, and all the bars, had some sort of bouncer in the front door. Looking for your ID, usually. The Anarchy Centre wasn't like that at all.
There's a cafe today. Hopefully, again, organic foods and fun, which people create themselves, we hope, which is the idea of the centre.
First thing that you saw when you went into the place was just a big seated area with lots of posters around the walls, information, and a cafe. The venue was off that. So you sort of went in, and right away, it was somewhere different. It was somewhere a bit more relaxed.
Whenever I was about 13, me and my friend came up from Bangor to Belfast because it was just, it was an exciting thing to do in its own right. We knew there was an anarchist centre in Belfast, but we just didn't know where it was. So we followed some punks and they led us to it. We lurked about outside and then had a wee look in, and then we were too scared and went back out again.
What are you coming along to the A Centre for?
The A Centre, the Anarchy Centre.
Well,
because
what I hear music, that's why.
So lots of great bands there. One, of course, was Crass.
As soon as they took that stage, you just looked at them and they were just reaching out. On a real in-your-face punk and political level, they were just going, listen, that's all we're here for. We're not here for we're not here to be a fighting accessory or to try and wring what we can out of you or whatever. This is about the ideas. Coming across this whole big, in-your-face, seemingly revolutionary form of music really enthused me then and gave me a sort of, I don't know if you call it hope, but a way out of where I was,
Society was divided here, and in every aspect of culture here, there was division. There was no symbol of unity or like a common area that people could share. And when you seen this kind of music coming in, it was talking about, for example, black-white unification in the UK, identifying with some of the struggles in the Third World or in South America and stuff like that. And you could really understand where they were coming from and you could relate to it. And that was a real relief growing up in division.
It was one of those things where you went along to Just Books or the Anarchy Centre, and it's one thing talking about doing things and theorising on things, but there were practical examples of real stuff happening, real exciting alternative stuff happening.
It was around that time where negotiations were going on with Brendan Mackin and the Unemployed Centre about getting a bit of space to set something up for the bands and stuff like that.
There was people there who were saying, well, we could do something beyond what we have now. We can create our own space.
The first building was down beside the Unemployed Centre, on Donegal Street, and we had a lot of help from the people in the unemployed centre. They helped us immensely.
Most of the people that were involved in the centre wanted this place for themselves. We weren't providing a service for others, we were providing a service for ourselves, or a building for ourselves, or a resource for ourselves.
We didn't have resources, you know, and it was a selfish thing, but it was about collectivizing and obviously sharing those resources as we got them, you know.
Northern Ireland and Belfast taught you to keep your head down, you know, and just get on with things. So when this came along, it was like, is this real, you know?
It just came from a dream.
To me, it was a centre for people's freedom of expression on all levels, whether it was artistically or musically or politically, or being able to come and find the food that you wanted to eat at a reasonable price.
Just a place to express themselves, either through art in the screen printing or through music. That was vital, to have an expression for music and a place to express whatever you sang or wrote about.
And just to be able to sit in an environment with other people of like minds, and create and develop that energy and that strength that we'd all had running through us, and just needed somewhere to base it.
People could just come and express themselves and talk, and without any barriers, really.
Me and my friend Gareth were both at Inns around in town, and we used to get, in sixth form, we used to get kicked out at lunchtime basically to go roam the streets of the city centre, and we'd sort of happened upon the place.
And the two of us were like sort of, you go first, no, you go first, and sort of shoving each other through the doors.
Gareth, I remember at the time, was getting very interested in being a vegetarian, and he kind of got very into sort of these crusading things, and this was perfect for him, and I found it sort of very interesting.
I don't know at that point if they'd ever come across people like us walking in with school uniforms, but there was nobody blinked, and just very quickly, in the space of maybe meeting people a couple of times, we were made to feel welcome, and then very quickly, you know, if we had anything to offer, there was a opportunity for us to participate.
I got involved in GIRO'S through a friend of a friend who became my friend, Luann Martin.
I'd come from quite an authoritarian background, and this certainly looked like it was questioning the assertiveness that I'd been brought up with, and I was very keen to question it and look at different ways of trying to question it.
The ethos behind the centre was that it was welcoming to everybody, and it was an alternative space for anybody who didn't really find the mainstream that appealing.
None of us wanted to be in mainstream jobs, contributing to the mainstream system. But you know, if you were able to take the benefit money to put it to good cause to try and change the system a wee bit, that's kind of where we all fitted in with it. Nobody was really lying about in their backsides doing nothing. Having that freedom, having that time, a lot of people, you know, don't do very much with it, but we did stuff with it, you know, and we used that space, if you like, to do what we did.
Throughout the week, you maybe had 20, 30 people running that building. Now, there was no way that was going to be sustainable in terms of paying people. And it was thought, well, you know, who wants paid anyhow? We're doing it for nothing. Like, you know, there are other benefits. You can get a practice for yourself. You can get a lunch. You know, there's the odd junket will come up and you'll get on it or whatever. You know, there's stuff like that. There's spin-offs. And that was good enough for most people.
When I was thinking about us as the collective, the very loose collective, and what we were, it kind of occurred to me in a way that we were like Thatcher's bastard children, because we were totally against everything that she was saying about there's no society and in total individualism and entrepreneurship, and yet we kind of were doing that in our own way. We were very keen on a collective working with respect for the individual, and we were entrepreneurs and sort of DIY, just kind of the reverse of what she was saying, but not to be avaricious or greedy or make money or exploit people. So we were doing it in a positive sort of a way.
The kind of lack of opportunity in Belfast at that time allowed us to get really involved in the centre, because it wasn't that you were trying to make an opportunity for yourself. You weren't giving something up to go and work there. You were looking around thinking, well, there's nothing much out there. Let's do it ourselves.
Gyro's was a real mix of people.
People come from all over town to use the place. And we do actively try and break down barriers in that respect. And we're positively anti-sectarian.
Till I came to Gyro's, I'd never met anyone from West Belfast. You know, that wasn't the sort of school I went to, and there weren't any cross-community activities. And the way Gyro's worked, that whenever I came in, it took me a while to realise that it was meeting people from the other parts of the city, because that's not the way people were presenting themselves, and people were treated on an individual basis for who they were, not what they were.
Non-sectarian in every way. So that non-sectarian including sexuality, including gender, including race, creed. You know, the whole broad spectrum.
Mid-80s, early 90s, there weren't that many spaces in the city that you could go to that weren't already designated as kind of one or the other. So I think Gyro's was really important because it was, I know this phrase has been used so many times, a cross-community space. We didn't really think about it that way either, but it was a space where you left the baggage that you might have grown up with very much at the door.
Somebody'd say, we'd go back to my house, and I'd think, well, I don't know how to get there. You know, but they only live a few miles away from where I was living, but I wouldn't have been able to find my way to their house. So slowly, for me personally, it opened up different aspects of life in Belfast that were closed to us.
In Gyro's at the very beginning, I started working in the cafe because that was the easiest way into it.
The cafe itself was nice, airy and bright and a bit dishevelled, has to be said.
The kitchen was very basic, but it had loads of wee jars of things and spices, and
You had maybe 8 tables and a counter with a cooker behind it.
tables made of, I think it was like plywood or something, and tubes of drain pipe. But I thought, what a fantastic do-it-yourself idea.
The walls were always adorned with like all the political sort of campaigns of the day, from like an anarchist, libertarian, socialist, or DIY kind of perspective. And there was also some artwork of local artists that would appear up on the wall from time to time, so it operated as a gallery as well.
There was always music playing, somebody was at the counter making food, and there was a good collection of people. It was open 5-6 days a week, I think, and there was always 2 people working every day, and I became one of those people. And that was great. You kind of got, I mean, you were just making it up as you went along, but you got a feel for the centre, what happened in it during the day, and the kind of people that were coming in and out. And it was a very social place to be, so it was great crack.
I would have been just up all night planning menus and just so excited about what I was going to make for everybody. So our day would have entailed arriving at 9, usually having to call on our friends on the way down to get them up out of bed after their late night.
Getting up in the morning, tramping down, that seemed very early, getting down there for like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock.
I get up early in the morning and go down to the local veg shop where we had our 10% discount or whatever it was, pick up the veg, take it round, chop it all up, prepare it.
Going to the co-op that used to be in Yorkgate and having to carry 6 or 7 bags of shopping, then having to go to the Nutmeg to get all your health food stuff.
I remember one occasion coming over Ormeau Bridge and the police stopped me and asked me to open my rucksack and what was in there. Asked me what it was, and I just looked at him and told him it was sauce mix rolls, and he kind of looked like he didn't want to know anymore. Didn't understand, didn't want to know. So I remember thinking afterwards it would have been a great way to smuggle anything around the city in those days.
People start coming in about 11. 11:30, you get art students coming around from York Street looking for a cup of coffee and some sweet to eat.
Lo and behold, anybody come in before 12 because nothing was ready, and they'd get a scowl from me if they wanted a cup of tea. And then we would serve the lunchtime crowd from 12 to maybe 2, half 2.
I mean, it's not like the sort of yuppie professional cathedral quarter now. We've got all these different options of where you can go out for your lunch. It wasn't like that. Donegal Street, there was hardly anything. I can't remember what. Maybe nothing, maybe a chippy somewhere or a sandwich bar, maybe not even that. So you had people from the whole area, from the solicitor's office, from the unemployed centre, from the office supplies place down the street, from the women's centre, from whoever who came across every lunchtime. The art college became a big thing, you know, and it was just a real diverse mix of people.
Gyro's was kind of a magnet for dysfunctional young adults, if you like. I mean, it sort of came from far and wide to hang out in Gyro's, probably because they felt like they'd be accepted by most people and not judged in the same way that they would kind of experience probably in their own lives. So that's inevitably why they ended up there. There were dozens of really crazy people.
Something was going to happen if you sat down and had something to eat. You were going to end up chatting to somebody about something worthwhile or just being involved.
Probably the vast majority were your crusty anarcho-punk types.
Some real hard nut anarchists, and some real kind of stoned out hippies, were kind of still trapped in the 60s or something,
Lots of young kids in school uniforms, and that made me feel kind of warm because I remembered myself trying to find out about places, so it was really nice to see young kids coming in and nervously getting their toasty.
I took my mother down there once to have a toasted sandwich, and she just, eyes popped out of her head, but, you could do that sort of thing if you really wanted to.
At the very beginning, it would have been more vegetarian, and then as we all became a bit more extreme in our opinion of that, we would have always provided at least 2 or 3 vegan options. I suppose our staple favourite that everybody liked was our veggie burgers, which we also took out to gigs and brought our own wee camping stove and cooked veggie burgers at gigs.
Vegan sausage rolls, if you can have such a thing, a couple of soups, and I remember I used to make a vegan cake, which was... it was all right. It did okay.
£30 a day we had to cater for however many people were coming in. But to me, that was a tremendous amount of money.
And the price was set by pretty much how much it cost us to make it.
A hot meal with 3 large salads would have been £1, which even then, 15, 20 years ago, was extremely cheap.
The quality kind of varied on a day-to-day basis because some people really were gifted, gifted chefs and really excelled, and then other people were doing their best.
Usually I would defer to one of the slightly older people who would have a better idea about cooking because I was scarcely able to chop an onion.
I was a terrible cook, but I managed to survive in GIRO'S for, I'm sure, at least 5 years, producing good enough food.
When I left home, I barely knew how to boil potatoes. So I was in GIRO'S as a cafe worker with my little recipe book, just following it religiously.
Some of the people who are particularly interested in the catering side of things set up kind of theme nights where they'd pick a country and do a vegan stroke vegetarian menu based on that country, and they were really popular and quite ahead of their time, I think.
And it would have been maybe from Hungary or Ireland we did, or Cajun, Mexican, Italian. I think the Italian was the most popular night. Cajun only had 2 people, but the rest of them were really positive. And they would have been full, they would have been booked, people would have phoned me at home and made the booking, and we would have turned GIRO'S into, we had tablecloths and candles, and people loved it.
GIRO'S was one of the major promoters for alternative music at that time. I don't think we ever saw it as that. What we saw it as was bringing over bands that we enjoyed, that we liked, that we wanted to see ourselves.
English bands, for example, would have been touring around, and then Belfast got put on the kind of the map, as it were.
Fugazi came over, Victim's Family, quite major bands brought over because people in the centre wanted to see them play in Belfast. I don't necessarily know they would have come over if they'd been on a different tour loop. It was kind of an intervention.
When I was moving, I came across a bin bag of all my letters, and it's just hundreds and hundreds of letters, and we would have written out to each other, and then somebody would have written back, and we would have written back about, yes, we've got a date. And occasionally we might have used the telephone, like if it was really pressured, but it just seems a very slow, sort of gentle way of doing things. So people would have heard of us for lots of different reasons. We would have been recording bands, Irish bands, and sending them out, those tapes and things out. And we also had Warzine magazine that would have been sent out. So kind of people got to hear about us. So then they approached us and said they really fancied coming over. So we would organise gigs, and it was really as fluid and gentle as that.
The audiences, at times the audiences were numbering up to 150, 200 people, and you were having to turn people away at the door.
I used to bring my wee fella down, and the other girls would have brought and they were just toddlers then, and they would have run about at the back of the gig hall, and people would have almost created this instant creche, self-help creche, where everybody just looked out for them and everybody played about with them. And again, you know, look how much changed in the world now.
Loads of people came, lots of money was made at the door, and after we'd done everything for the band, then we handed them all the money. So you're sort of going, hang on a minute, what are we getting out of this that can help the centre develop and flourish? We weren't that good at that sort of thing.
I brought along my wee 4-track cassette recorder, and I used to do demos for our band. And then because the Warzone Collective was a collective, there was lots of other bands involved in that, and they all needed demos. We were all skint. We were always all skint. So we didn't have the money to go to studios, recording studios. So we used to record bands with the cassette recorder. That kind of moved on over the years. It took to about the mid-90s before we eventually got the cash together to buy kind of half-decent recording studio equipment. Basically built a studio in the near centre.
In here we have very dark, half-built recording studio which should be finished in a couple of months. We have the band room, which we have about 30 bands using the place, and it gets in a real mess, usually.
It started off, it was just punk bands, but as it grew and as word got round, it was the only cheap practice room in Belfast. So there was an awful lot of different, wide variety of bands that were using that all the time. So that had a knock-on effect on the studios. There was a wide variety of bands came to the studio as well then.
We were surrounded by other people in bands and just had a chat with people one night and went, wouldn't it be good to start one as well? And we did. It was myself and another girl were singing.
The first band which Alistair and I played in together was called God Cops, which played an unbelievably elementary style of punk rock, which we still get reminded about years and years later.
I wouldn't have been an overly confident person about doing anything really up front, but that seemed to really bring me out of that zone, and I loved it. There's nothing really better than being up on a stage, watching people enjoying, listening, dancing and listening to what you're doing.
But it was just about playing good tunes, such as we were capable of performing at that time.
I was in a band, we were called FUAL, and I was the singer. And again, it's like working in the cafe. I wasn't a singer or a performer, but in this kind of way I could be, and could be accepted, and it would be grand. So I wrote some of the songs, and we played gigs, and we went on tours and recorded, and it was just an amazing experience.
Well, the band was called Sledgehammer, and we did one tour in England ourselves and FUAL, which was Pizzi and Kate and Luann. Top spot locations like Whitby and Scarborough, I think it was. And it was great fun. Again, we went from one little place very like GIRO'S to another around these wee towns. You just found these places where there was people doing the same sort of thing as you, and in these sort of wee backwater towns where it was just great to see it.
I got a band together with some friends then, which was called Unsound, and we just played gigs in Belfast. I mean, I think the height of our career, such as it was playing a couple of gigs outside Northern Ireland, down in Dublin and Cork and stuff.
Get back in front! The band, Stalag 17. We toured England, and we'd done a few gigs around different parts of Ireland, and by and large the scenes were the same as but basically across the UK it was the same as it was here, in terms of people just hiring out pubs or whatever, and that's where you done your gigs. A great spirit and stuff, and very friendly, but it was just like, okay, that's what it is. The continent was just something completely different. It really did blow us away. I mean, at the level of organisation, whether it was like the squats in Holland, Germany, Belgium, whatever, or just the social centres, the social centres that were like run by local councils and local government and stuff like that. It was just a real eye-opener about the level of organisation, and it was, by and large, punks.
The French, for example, the French groups that we were staying in had very, very organised buildings with very elaborate recording studios and space for bands and loads of equipment, and that was exciting to see. But it seemed like a different world from what we had ever expected for GIRO'S. It seemed a wee bit as if they'd sold out, actually. But I'm sure they just had masses of funding and support from their arts councils.
Every gig you went to, it was just fantastic. There was huge big factories or theatres or whatever that had been taken over, whether they were squatted or they were set aside by the local authority as a social centre, and they were run by the people our age. You know, there was no guy in a suit, you know, sort of telling them who they could book. They booked all their own gigs, you know. They wrote you the checks at the end of the night or give you a wad of money. They fed you, they looked after you.
All the lyrics were really earnestly sincere about politics and about why Northern Ireland was just a screwed up place and why sectarianism was wrong. And it's probably, you look back on it 20 years later and be slightly like, you'd cringe at the way you expressed yourself at the time, but it's still, I'd stand by it. I think it was cool.
It was a great way to get your message across. Whatever you were feeling inside, whatever you were full of angst about, you could get rid of it. Whether people could always understand what you were singing about, but you know, there was always lyric books with whatever recordings we all did. So it was a way of promoting the things that really mattered to you. There was a fanzine magazine that used to come out in those days called Anarchist Black Cross. And reading that one day, I read an article about a man in Birmingham called Martin Foran who had been arrested by the West Midlands Serious Crimes Squad and accused of committing a burglary at some location, and he had, I think, at least 3 or 4 cast iron alibis for being somewhere entirely different at the time. But while he was being held in custody, he had been assaulted so vigorously by them that he had ruptured his intestine and had to have a colostomy bag fitted. We used to organise benefit gigs where the bands would play, and you know, I mean, in those days people were only playing maybe £1 in or 50p in. But I used to be able to send off postal orders for 200 quid to his wife in Birmingham, you know, and we did that maybe every 2 or 3 months or something. So it felt like you were definitely trying to help in some shape or form. And that, I just found that really stimulating. I loved it. You know, I hate the thought of anybody suffering an injustice like that and people forgetting about them and not helping them. And if people just get on board and do a wee bit, you can make a bit of a difference.
I was interested in organising women-only space and women-only discos. I've been linked in with some of the women involved in various women's centres and lesbian groups and things. So we had a venue, and often the women were looking for venues that would be suitable for them, and they kind of were having a sort of parallel experience to what the punks were having. When they organised the women-only disco, they were kind of looked at by people who owned the bars as what, this is kind of weird. So we were a welcoming environment and facilities of sorts for people. So it was a space, and it was good to have different people involved in as well and coming to the place too. One of the gigs in the old GIRO'S where we had this wee practice room, so it was this tiny box of a room with no windows. It was a bit of a sweat box, and we used to occasionally have smaller gigs there. And I think this is sort of indicative a bit of what the time was like. We had this noisy band on and lots of people around, and the RUC were driving down Donegal Street and they heard the noise. So they came in and joined the party. It was just really surreal. And I was trying to remember, I'm sure they were drunk as well on duty. I think there was a couple of them were sober, trying to ferry the drunk men out, the drunk police officers out, but they partied on down for a while, and we were just all looking at them. It was a bit odd.
In here we have a print room. We can print stuff like posters for bands, t-shirts. We've got a darkroom in there. A lot of young photographers use it to do their own black and white photography. We can also do things like promo photos for bands, that sort of thing.
I couldn't believe that we were just all so young and on the dole, and we had all this professional screen printing equipment, and we were producing t-shirts and posters, and it was very exciting.
I think we inherited a lot of the equipment from the Rathcoole self-help group, and it was all really huge and all looked a bit like a torture chamber to me, but they worked away there and produced some great artwork.
I think we kind of tried to go a bit high tech and do silk screen printing, which we tried our hardest. We did get there in the end, but it was very do-it-yourself. It was really just kind of paper cutouts sometimes and just using your imagination. So the posters all kind of had a very similar and distinct look about them because of the technology that we had to use.
Okay, we're on the top floor now. In here, this is being used as an exhibition space at the minute. It's for young artists from Belfast who don't get a chance to exhibit in most commercial large venues. They do the stuff here. They usually run for about a week. Kate, who would have done a lot of the art stuff in there, had it set up so that there were boards right along all the walls which could just be unscrewed, flipped around, and suddenly they were white instead of black, and you had a really great gallery space. And that was done for, you know, almost no money, the cost of the boards and the screws.
Poetry Collective, I mean, it was billed as a poetry night, but it wasn't just a poetry night. And even the word poetry is kind of a bit of a misnomer because, I mean, people were writing songs that were lyrics. I mean, that's also poetry. I mean, these are just kind of different people's expressions, if you like. One particular incident that always stands out was in a party in Jerusalem Street in the Holy Lands of Belfast was literally attacked by the police following a noise complaint. People were handcuffed to railings and beaten. 2 people served time for something that they didn't do. I was at the party, but I managed to get offside. And Nick wrote this song called Organise, and it was just about, you know, this is what we face. And sometimes it might be the first time that some of us have ever faced anything like this, but we have to organise, we have to stand up to it. So you get my kind of silly, maybe the word silly perhaps, so you get some of this poetry and you get some of the powerful political message, and you get maybe somebody like Martin Lynch would come along and tell a story or something about one of his plays. So it was a real mixed bag of an evening, you know.
Music excited me and my sister very much at that time, and we started to do our own magazine. It was first called A Bigger Splash, and then we changed it after the first issue to Anxious. And we had a friend who did the artwork, and my sister would have done the editing and the typing and all the hard work, and I would have done the fun things like the articles and writing about any bands we'd seen. So our first magazine concentrated a lot on going out into the town and taking photos of punks, which was quite embarrassing because it's not a very cool thing to do.
I was quite interested in certain sort of politics, a little bit like animal rights stuff and militant vegetarian, so I wanted to try and do some sort of like propaganda for that. Alistair was interested in the music and interested in design things, and he was putting that angle to it. We agreed on a title, which was Mere Sood Mag, which is from a song by The Fall. First issue came out, and it was literally, I don't know, if we photocopied 100 photocopies, that was probably lots. Big clunky A4 thing with staples down the side, and then as soon as we got involved with GIRO'S and then just books, we were able to get it produced on A5, and it was folded and it was properly stapled, and it just looked like the absolute last word in professionalism to us, like. But it was just a printed black and white fanzine, interviews with bands, politics, articles, opinions, letters. It was great crack. GIRO'S came directly out of the Poetry Collective. And it was an eclectic mix of poetry, song lyrics, local artists doing line drawings and stuff like that. And it was initially a benefit. And it was just going to be a one-off thing. It probably took about 2 years to get together. I think I started it in 87, 88, and didn't come out to be 89, 90. By this stage, I'd got firmly ensconced in anarchist ideas. And I started to do a second magazine called Front Cover. GIRO'S would come out, and then Front Cover would come out, and then it would maybe be a benefit cassette, and so on. This went on up until about 1997. Particularly Front Cover, I mean, it sold 1,500 copies at its time, which is amazing. It was your way of getting information out, and that went from whether it was gigs and music through to whatever campaigns you were involved in, or international news about what was happening, and they were such an important part of, I mean, every gig you went to at that in those times, you had people going around trying to sell fanzines. GIRO'S was like a baptism of fire for me in terms of like anarchist politics. Very quickly met very articulate people who had a fairly clear idea about what they thought about Northern Ireland and about life, about the unjust nature of the world as we find it when we arrive in it.
It was the sort of place you could just be sitting having your lunch and something would pop up, and it always turned into a round the table discussion of any sort, and people weren't really afraid to challenge each other either. It wasn't a case of everybody agreeing with everybody.
Some people would have been more involved in the politics of Northern Ireland. Some people would have been more involved in feminist politics. So everybody, I suppose, had their own little pet ism.
Anarchism's a label it's very easy to pick up and start using without perhaps necessarily having an appreciation of what it means culturally and historically. At that time, we jumped in and I took up the anarchist thing quite enthusiastically, but it's taken me the best part of 20 years to sort of come to a fuller understanding of what the word actually means and its significance.
I was into the theory, I was into planning for the revolution in the future, but really the most important thing was to have something going now, a practical example of what could be achieved come the glorious day. And that's what it was for me. You know, that was the whole point of doing everything, and that was the whole point of the centre. And not only that, and because it was a place that I wanted to be there. I wanted to have a place to practice. I wanted to have a cheap place to eat, a cheap place to hang out with my friends.
Some days it was a bit Lord of the Flies, admittedly. There was a certain sort of madness infected the place down there, but generally it was kind of nice sort of seeing people trying to take something like that and actually genuinely make it work. You know, working very hard at taking something that is, you know, essentially largely collectivized and working through, you know, all the issues that would generally throw up, of which, you know, there's awfully an awful lot of them, and especially when you kind of get an open door thing, people coming in and out all the time, and people have different expectations. Some people understand that, you know, there's a lot of work involved in keeping everything running. Some people, you know, kids just wander in and go, hey, this is everybody's, let's all just, you know, do the fun bits and not do the messy bits, and, you know, so it was a very interesting experience.
It ranged from the utterly most fantastic person-to-person relationships to the ultimate, you know, which is a kind of just a microcosm of everyday life, really, you know. I mean, there was some characters that you got on really well with, you worked really well, you sparked off each other and stuff like that. You were able to work together on a lot of different things. Other people, it was a bit of a, you know.
It was part of the sort of downsides of collectivization, where everybody was too scared to actually tell other people what to do, and they didn't always quite get that it was okay to share your experience with other people. So people just kind of did to chuck in on stuff and just started cracking on without really discussing jobs. Like, you know, I remember we sort of almost finished building a recording studio and wandered in one day and discovered to complete horror that somebody had just started painting the door of the recording studio, but just started doing gloss straight onto bare wood, and, you know, things like that. So there was a lot of madness like that, but it sort of added to the charm of the place, I think.
We had this sort of letter writing forum that went on, and a lot of people were very curious about what was happening in Belfast and Ireland as a whole, and we'd be writing down what we thought was going on, and one of the people involved, DG, had said, look, John, we're so fed up writing, you know, 15 letters a day, going, well, so could we not get a kind of a manifesto type thing, you know, something, a leaflet we could all agree on, I could slip it in with a letter as well, going, look, have a read of that and see what you think. Well, all war broke loose. We're not a war zone manifesto.
People in your sort of wider world would kind of always wondered why you did it. So what do you get out of this? It's just madness. Why don't you go get a job? You're crazy. But, you know, they didn't quite see that sort of there was so much other, you know, new stuff in there which you wouldn't have gotten anywhere else.
It was vital for the city. It was the only thing of its kind in the city. And something that was, when it closed, people didn't realise what they had till it was gone, and it was sorely missed. and it left a gaping hole, if you like, in the countercultural kind of alternative Belfast scene.
I don't really understand how the whole GIRO'S setup would have fallen down on any criteria for cross-community relations funding, because I doubt whether, certainly not before it and definitely not, I would imagine, since it, has there been a group that has pulled people from all sides of the community in the way that it did.
There were some very supportive people, I remember, in the Arts Council, but in the grand scheme of things, they didn't play ball with the sort of funders or the rest of the voluntary sector, and were kind of looked at sort of slightly suspiciously, if you like, by people who would see themselves as the proper voluntary sector.
Generally speaking, most of the funders were wary of us, and probably looking back, couldn't really blame them. Would turn up in the gear, and it was probably a bit intimidating for them or whatever. We weren't like other groups. There was no suits or ties.
I don't think that we really looked like what they were expecting. We had no hierarchy as well, so I think perhaps funders at that time found it a bit difficult to believe that it worked. There wasn't a hierarchy, there wasn't somebody in charge, so if a funder was getting in touch with us, they could speak to any one of us, or somebody would take charge of the application forms and stuff like that, but we weren't a structure as such.
When it comes to the idea of grassroots and stuff that's quite organic, there's actually a resistance within that. I'm not saying it's all just the funders. There's a resistance within that to pigeonhole yourself and to go, right, well, look, we're going to do this to fit in, just to get money. That's one part of it. The other side, as far as the funders is concerned, is that is a requirement. That's a requirement. You have to tick the boxes.
Either we weren't communicating ourselves very well, or other people were choosing not to get it, and I'm not sure. Maybe it's a bit of both. But no, definitely nobody was coming looking to support us in community relation terms, and I don't think we were giving ourselves acknowledgement for what we were actually achieving, because we were just doing it.
At meetings there was talk of paid posts, for example, and some people were enthusiastic about that, because they'd like to get off the dole and get a bit more money and stuff like that, but plus at the same time contribute to something worthwhile, whereas other people thought it was anathema and it was against anarchist ideals and you can't do this and you can't do that.
Some people thought that if there were proper jobs, for example, then you kind of create this sort of managerial class inside the organisation, which nobody really wanted, but there was always that fear of that.
We could have lasted a lot longer. We could have gone on for another 10, 20 years maybe, and gone down the whole workers' cooperative route where people got paid proper wages and for the work they did. But ultimately it got rejected. People didn't want to go down that way. They thought it would change it. Still to this day, I don't know if that was the right decision or the wrong decision.
A lot of the times in my work now, I feel that I'm being funder-led, in that funders are looking for a particular type of project and a particular type of activity, and often you can feel that you're just trying to reshape yourself for whatever's new, the new agenda, and that can be quite demoralising. And I think the centre didn't really do that, wasn't prepared to do that, wasn't prepared to change its shape just to get funding. And that's probably why we had to shut in the end. So, and if we had changed our shape, it would have been a different thing altogether.
Now I can see the value of having learned so much, from GIRO'S. I can't describe how much I learned, and it did give me a lot of confidence to be able to run. Like, I didn't work there every day, but the 3 days that I was there, you were running a place. You were cooking, cleaning, waitressing. You were doing all those things, and with only maybe one other person. And they were doing all their parts as well, and you were working as a team, and all those skills that you don't realise you're learning at the time.
Give you lots of resources to sort of teach yourself stuff, and certainly with sort of music technology and computers and stuff, because we got we got an Apple Mac in, and for some insane amount of money. We got funded for that, and stuff you would never have access to. So it did open up a lot of doors for you if you wanted to go through them.
I learned everything that I use in work now. It all came from GIRO'S. It's about managing a venue, about working with people, about putting projects together on small budgets, about just, you know, making funding applications, learning, using a computer. I learned that there. For me personally, those 5 years were absolutely invaluable.
It's definitely informed every job I've been involved in.
All the skills I learned or the experience that I had from working with gigs, and I mean, I don't know how many gigs I did PA at in GIRO'S, hundreds and hundreds, or bands are recorded, or, you know, working with the practice room, getting, you know, sorting out the gear. That's generally speaking what I do now. So all that experience, that collective experience, you know, that's how I'm doing what I'm doing.
I trained to be a fitness instructor, and then I was asked to incorporate the dance moves that I had learned through my fitness for children at a party, which I thought was the absolutely most stupidest idea I'd ever heard in my life. But I thought, I'll give it a go. I'm going to earn £50. I'll give it a go. I would do anything at this point. And it was so successful that I started my own business doing children's parties. And from that, I have been able to develop those skills into teaching drama.
So I ended up sort of going off and sort of teaching myself to be a designer.
I started to work in theatre as a technician.
Now I run an art centre in an area of, as they describe it, multiple deprivation in Edinburgh, and it's all about encouraging people to come in, get involved in the arts, be that music. We've got a recording studio, which is obviously, GIRO'S was really influential in that. It's about people coming, getting people to encouraging people to use their creativity for their own ends and also for education and employment.
I'm a community artist, but I live up at in Fleshwater, where I moved there after I left GIRO'S, after I left Belfast. My son was about 2 years old then, and I had always had this desire to live on the land, sort of reclaim the land and work communally with other people to live, I suppose, an alternative green lifestyle.
I got very interested in herbal medicine, and I went on to become a medical herbalist and a naturopath, which is what I do now. Again, looking for alternatives to the mainstream, to the bitter end.
GIRO'S most definitely, that whole era most definitely shaped me as the person that I always felt I probably was but couldn't ever find.
It brought me out from what I seen as a no future to having something that was visionary and keeps me motivated to this day.
It gave me a community and a kind of a sense of family, and it made me realise that that you can do things.
I suppose if I'm going to have one word to sum it up, what it meant to me personally would have been friendship. I think the friendships that we gleaned from there were just so important. A lot of the people that I know from there then, from I was 17, are still incredibly good friends now.
Whilst it was a very group effort, you know, people like PC were completely key to the whole thing, because without their sort of, you know, force of personality, big chunks of that would never have happened. And, you know, credit where it's due. They're the ones who put all the really hard work in and, you know, made that happen. And without that, sort of kids wandering the street.
I had people like that coming to me who were 14, 15, who come to me now and going, you don't realise how that changed my life, and how that living where I lived, I only had this, and then this was like a light getting turned on. So the light getting turned on in people's lives about other possibility is the legacy, as far as I'm concerned.